Hey, everybody, welcome. It's another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santy, and joining me today is Mike Huber.
Hello.
Hey, Mike, we're going to talk about your book again,
Oh, good.
the new book. I hope that by now a lot of people have this already in their hands. By the time this episode comes out, here's a big reveal for you. I know this will be thrilling for you. By the time this episode comes out, I will have done my annual 5 books I loved this year thing on my nerd Facebook page, and this will be on there. So,
Yay.
so thank you for it again.
Sure.
So today we're going to go to, you've got a chapter called Multiple Experts, and a quote kind of about being on the same team as children to start us. So I'll do that quote, and then I'm going to ask you maybe to just talk about multiple experts.
Sure.
And then we'll go into the quote. But
Yeah.
so in part of this conversation in your chapter, a part of this discussion, you said you should not threaten any quote unquote consequences for a child's actions, whether it is an attempt to engage with others, an attempt to move, or dysregulation. You are on the same team as the child. You can remove barriers and teach them the skills they need for future situations, but threatening them with consequences puts you in opposition with the child and makes you the quote unquote expert on what should happen. In essence, consequences exclude the child from the process. So I'm assuming in this piece, the child is one of the experts from your multiple
Yes.
experts. So I'll just let you go for a while.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with that part because when I was sort of thinking about what the book would be, and I was using just basically a cultural humility lens. So thinking that there's not one right answer to anything, like there's multiple ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I was rambling about it with Sonia, my girlfriend, and she just sort of said, yeah, but the child is the expert, right?
Nice.
And it was like, oh yeah.
This is why I keep you around.
Right. But I think, it was sort of that thing that it's important to keep in mind, because in the moment in the classroom, because I'm really aiming this book at the person who's with the child. So
right.
The classroom, the program, whatever word you want to use, you get dysregulated. And it's easy to go into, I just need this screaming to stop for my benefit, right? And it's natural, and we have to be aware of that initial reaction. You don't have to actually react out loud, but you pause, realize that's where you're going to, especially if you've experienced trauma, or if maybe the parenting you received as a kid was very consequence filled, all those things. And you just have to recognize, oh yeah, my first reaction is this because of my experience. But what I want to do, the childhood I want this child experience, is this. And then you can respond. So thinking of that child as the main expert of what they're doing, the way. So my newest way of thinking of this is Dr. Winnie Dunn was just on Two Sides of the Spectrum podcast as we record this. And she said, she's addressing occupational therapists, but she said, we're not sensory therapists, we're occupational therapists. And occupation meaning, what activities does the child want to do during the day? And we help them do those things. We have to know the sensory profile. We have to know where they're at. And so sometimes it's adapting the environment for the child. Sometimes it's helping the child deal with, the environment, maybe putting on headphones or something. And maybe it is desensitizing to certain things that are just so overwhelming, whatever it is. But the point is, they're not there to fix the sensory thing, but that sensory profile, which is essentially what the child is feeling, is the information, right? So the child's the expert on, paint freaks me out. If it touches me or my clothing, I'm going to lose it. That's the expert. We know that's there. And no other person can tell the child that they're wrong for feeling that way. Right. So, and that's what consequences does, is it says, nope, you're what you're doing right now is wrong. And it's not to say that an action or a behavior, I hate to use the word behavior. So
I know there's no good replacements for all the words I don't want to use.
Is is like allowable, right? Like I can't, you can't just let a kid hit another kid because they are overwhelmed by the water on their sleeve.
Right.
But you cannot tell the child that the water on their sleeve is not causing them such distress that they're striking out.
Uh-huh.
And if you do a consequence, you're still not on the same team with what can we do about your sleeve? You're just going right to the action, and now you've lost the child.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're on the same team as the child, wow, that sleeve is really bothering you. Let's take care of that. And then, wow, so and so is, sad that you pushed them.
Right.
So you can. It's not that you don't check in with, have a child check in with others, but you can't just ignore, the whatever you want to call it, the reason behind the action, I guess.
Right. Or tell them that their discomfort is wrong, or that they're wrong about,
or that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care how you're feeling, you can't do that. And it's like, well, they did it already.
And if you want me not to do it again, you have to care about how I'm feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. And essentially, you're giving that, what you can do is, I can't remember exactly how he said it in that quote, but giving them the tools to, in the future, when their sleeve gets wet,
remove barriers and teach skills.
Or what can they do to, like, oh, I really want to go play in that water, but I hate my sleeves getting wet. I'm going to take off my long sleeves.
Yeah.
Pull up my sleeves or whatever. Although pulling up sleeves for a 4-year-old, they never do it well enough that it's going to stay up. So,
yeah.
But,
or they get so stretched out from being pushed up that they just are falling back down again. Yeah.
And I think the other piece that I didn't really write in here, but was kind of an impetus for the book, was if you treat every child as if they've had trauma, the first thing people would tell you is don't use consequences. You want to use comfort. You want to give them a sense of control. So a person who's experienced trauma needs a sense of control. The more out of control they feel, the more their their actions will feel coming from nowhere. They'll feel violent, or they'll feel, whatever. And it's like, so if you want to help them stop that, they need to stay in control.
Right.
And then you can have, so that's another way to look at it. And a child may or may not have have experienced trauma, but giving them or helping them keep a sense of control and be on their side is going to help them in the long run anyways.
Yeah.
And even if you don't want that behavior in your room, if it drives you nuts, you're going to be dealing with those actions. Sorry, it's a behavior. You're going to deal with those actions less, the more you stop using consequences.
Well, and I think ultimately what we're talking about is adults relearning, because culturally we've probably been raised in a consequence, morality focused environment, whether that's home or school or workplaces. And a lot of our teacher prep, when we're talking about that word that we have to keep saying we hate using, behavior, training is very consequence heavy. So sort of what you're doing here is giving everybody an invitation to maybe follow an instinct that we didn't like doing all that, but that's what we were told we had to do.
And those like workshops. And the workshops that people often take in our field, where it's like these one and done workshops. Well, here's a quick fix.
Right.
And the problem with quick fixes, is it's like you're just like wallpapering over shit, like that'll sure, you don't see it now, but
Yeah. I wonder if I'll be brave enough to name this episode Wallpapering Over Shit. We'll see. Okay, so I've got two different follow-up things, but one is, so the book is Inclusion Includes Us. I forgot to say that at the beginning for people who haven't heard us talk about this already. And your the last sentence of that quote was, in essence, consequences exclude the child from the process. So can you flesh out that connection a little bit?
And maybe that gets into the whole multiple experts thing, right?
Yeah.
Because when any situation that happens in an early care program, involves you, the adult, whether you call yourself a care provider, teacher, whatever,
Practitioner.
practitioner, yes, or even in an OT, pediatric OT,
Yeah.
same thing. But when something is happening, your actions and your experience is part of it, and
Mhm.
your training, your education, the things you've read, the podcasts you've listened to, or you're bringing all of that.
Mhm.
The child, or multiple children, depending on the situation, is bringing their experience, their skills that they have now, their body, so the way their senses work, the way they're experiencing the world. They're bringing all that.
Mhm.
And then, of course, those books you read, the podcasts you listened to, all that, those people are experts also. That's how you got information. And not everyone is going to have the same ideas, but that's where you come in. You get to decide which ideas, oh yeah, when I'm in the classroom, this is what works.
Mhm.
Or in the therapy room, this is what works. So you get to decide that, but you're listening to those experts. And then there's the families themselves. So the more you know from the family about a child, the more you understand the child too, because the child is not going to say, oh, just so you know, when I was 2, I was experiencing regular neglect, at least once a week, whatever. My parents went out and, didn't come back for hours or whatever. The child is never going to tell you that. I guess the
Right.
family probably isn't either, but
Yeah.
but they could tell you a lot of things, I
Yeah.
guess is my point, right? So
Yeah.
you'd know the child better and what their actions are, having the family context. And then I also have the cultural component, because some of it, if it's a culture different than your own, just the family might give you the information, might not, but also there are certain cultures where the child is not of the same culture as the parents. So it could be a transracial adoption. It could be a deaf child with hearing
Mhm.
parents. It could be a intersex child with, parents who are not intersex,
Mhm.
whatever it is. So that the less the less the adults in the family are part of the culture, the more you might have to rely on those experts too. But
Mhm.
just that idea that any situation, all of those things are happening at the same time, and yet you have to react in the moment.
Right.
Or maybe I should use the word respond.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you will have your implicit bias will make you go to immediate reactions, but you can over time with reflective practice
Mhm.
pause and decide, is that the way I want to respond here? And then
Yeah.
respond in a way that takes into account all of those experts, even though most of it will happen where you don't really know why you're doing it anymore. But the
Yeah.
more you've experienced a culture other than your own that the child is in, the more you might kind of get, oh yeah, I remember seeing this, experiencing this,
Yeah.
so
So
that's kind of where it comes from, if that's
yeah,
what.
I think the reflective piece is really important here because
Yes,
as you're listing off all those the varied elements of expertise that are out there that can go into each decision that might feel really overwhelming. And I think when anytime I talk to people about thinking differently about behavior,
right,
um uh they feel really overwhelmed by all the things
yes,
that I'm asking them to take into consideration. So
right,
it's important to acknowledge that you won't always know exactly
right,
what's
right,
right in the moment, but the more you process it and think about it and talk to other people about it, if you have that, that kind of a network or even that kind of support in your workplace to have time to talk to coworkers, the more natural it becomes, and you don't even realize maybe that you're taking
right.
all that expertise in to make your decision.
And that's where I like the phrase being on the same team,
Yeah.
because if you do respond to a child's actions and it seems to go well, and when you're talking to the family, oh yeah, this happened and this is what I said. And then the family could say, oh yeah, that's how we deal with it, or that reminds me of something we've seen, or and so when you share after, even though you didn't necessarily take into account then you can go to them. And then the opposite, right? If you try some, oh, that didn't work, you try something different, oh, that didn't work. And
Yeah.
there's this action that keeps happening that is whatever, maybe not working in the classroom. So just, other kids are getting hurt, or this child seems distraught, and you don't, what can I do to help with that? Then you go to the parents with a different thing of like, yeah, I'm noticing this. What, have you noticed it? What do you do? And so then you're relying on their expertise. So part of it is when you just think of being on the same team, if it seems like it's working, you don't have to like check in with, well, let me go read up on that. Let me go, go to a few cultural events, go to, but if things aren't working, you really need to, and then, so part of it is always having a reflective practice really helps. So if it's a regular reflective practice, your coworker or whoever it is, my main reflective practice now is podcast. So because whenever something's coming up, like, I just got to record an episode on this.
I can't possibly just approach the nerds as friends. I must record about it with them.
Exactly. But and frankly, that's what teaching the body teaching with the body and mind, that podcast, the four of us on that podcast, there were like a bunch of us who did reflective practice once a month. And we realized that we could probably do a podcast. And then some people were like, no, thank you. And then four of us were like, we like hearing our voices. So, but that's how that started.
I'm glad.
There was like 3 or 4 years of us doing it without the idea that we do it for others.
Yeah.
But what it did was it really helped us like, hey, I noticed this. This is what I did. I'm not so sure that was the best thing. What do you think?
Yeah.
And being able to reflect and just knowing that there's different experts, and knowing when your culture is the same as the child's, it's probably not going to be a cultural thing. When it's different and things aren't working, you might realize, oh, this might have something to do with this cultural difference.
Yeah.
Is there another person at my workplace I can talk to? I'm from a large agency, so I get a little more work with that, but sometimes it's not that, but it might be, am I in a Facebook group? Am I whatever on a Discord server that has people, whatever.
Sure.
Or people in real life too, of course. Just that doesn't happen very often.
Right, I know. My in real life circle is very small, so I have to go to my pretend friends.
And sometimes they don't have to know about early childhood to help.
Right. Absolutely.
If you're working with a child, maybe they have autism and do I have any neurodivergent friends? Or are there other adults I can ask?
Right.
And of course, no one person's an expert. This is where the child is the main expert. Nobody in a cultural group has the answers for the child you're working with, but they have perspective that might help you. That's still the one who has to decide what to do.
Yeah. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about the times that in various roles I've been on, like IEP teams, care teams, planning teams, whatever they call it. And, so the language of being on a team is very familiar. Yeah. But I think what you're talking about and involving intentionally and reflectively involving the child, accepting the child as part of the team. I don't want to say involving because that's still under our control. Well, it's still very controlled by us, but accepting and acknowledging that they are part of the team and are giving us their expertise, sharing their expertise with us is different from therapists and teachers and maybe parents. I think parents and families aren't always really truly on that team.
Right.
Other than sitting in the room at the time.
Yep.
It's a totally different conversation.
Yeah. And I think, so Dr. Winnie Dunn, I'm going to go back to her again. So she's one of the people who developed the concept of sensory profile, or maybe not the concept. I'm not an occupational therapist, so people are going to say, no, you got it wrong. Or she developed a screening tool to help identify a person's sensory profile.
Okay.
It's more accurate. But she's been working in the field for 40 years or whatever, or 30 something years. And she talked about that whole idea of we're an occupational therapist, not a sensory therapist. So one of the things she said was, so if a therapist asked me like, oh, well, they're having trouble brushing their teeth, so we are working on this in the therapy room. She's like, well, no, you need to get a toothbrush and a
Yeah.
toothpaste and, watch the child do, she was talking about all sorts of age ranges, but
Uh-huh.
like you have to then watch what they're doing and say, oh, this is where you're finding the problem, or,
Uh-huh.
like you're actually there watching that person. So that person is the expert, and all you can do is give ideas, give your expertise,
Yeah.
And so, obviously sometimes when you're working with a, 2-year-old who can't, who's not walking, but, is showing movement, like
Hmm.
whatever, and you're working towards helping them stand up, they're showing you in a way what they can do.
Right.
And then you're trying to find what's the motivating factor. So you're not necessarily getting, again, like a verbal, like, oh, have you tried this?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're sort of looking at what's the, what are they doing? But you're still, I guess it's the strength you're looking for.
Right.
What are you doing? And
Yeah.
now, oh, here's the part you wish was different or whatever. I can help you with that, but it's not starting with the deficit.
Right.
That's a key piece. And this is where, we need a therapist to join us to talk about
Yes.
that strengths-based. But in the classroom, I can certainly say that when I look at a kid and just say, this is the kid who always throws paint, or this is the
Mhm.
kid who always hits others or bites others.
Yeah.
And as soon as I just go to seeing the deficit first, even if I then say, oh, but they tell funny jokes or whatever, it's still like, but I'm starting with that. Or
Yeah.
how can I get rid of this behavior? I'm still starting with the deficit and
Yeah.
not, what is the child trying to do? How can I help them do that, without them biting the other
Yeah.
children?
Yeah. Well, and I think even when we have a strength-based model or approach, a lot of times that comes still from that checklist of our idea of success
Yeah,
or our idea of strength. And
right.
we're still, even when we're looking for strengths, we're trying to make them fit our idea of strength
Yeah,
instead of just watching them
right.
and listening to them and saying, okay, this individual child, I don't even need a checklist. Here's
Right.
where we can build from, or even that sort of deficit language that I wish I hadn't said. But here's what he brings.
Yeah. And
Here's what
what's
they
their
bring.
goal or their motivation or
Yeah.
whatever. And that's where, with young children, you may need more of that from the parent or from your knowledge of what they're probably going to want to do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then be aware when you're watching, do they want to?
Right.
I mean, I'm just thinking of a child that I was with years ago who had no interest in letters or literacy, and he's heading off to kindergarten. But what he did care about was animals. And
Uh-huh.
what he did want to do was tell me about animals. So I was like, well, tell me about animals. Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. Hey, do you want your mom to know about them too? Sure. Okay. How could
Uh-huh.
we let her know? And so he would like draw or write, not
Uh-huh.
write words, but like draw
Right.
pictures or something, So then he just started doing that and then leave a note for his mom about a narwhal or whatever.
Yeah.
And eventually, he wanted to, well, how do I spell that or whatever?
Right.
And so that one was like that is getting into the um, trying to do what he wanted, but what he wanted to do was communicate with his mom.
Uh-huh.
And at some point, he got to a point where he realized, I need some words here.
Yeah.
And
So,
so, but my main motivation was having him connect, like what he really wanted to do.
mhm.
There was a little bit of, yeah, I know that mom's worried about the word.
Right.
But it was still like I never asked him to write anything, right?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
just wanted him to like start, because that's, the written word is only there to communicate ideas to people who aren't with you,
Uh-huh.
whether in time or space.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And once you
Okay.
want to do that, I mean, you can record a podcast,
Right.
but then you have to
So,
figure out what format is it in, because in 10 years, I don't know what format will be there. But
yeah.
written word will be there in 10 years.
Yeah. So we're not necessarily saying you can never have a goal.
Yeah, yeah. But it was really building off of what does he want to do with it?
Mhm.
Um, So yeah, that's why I wanted to bring up that example of even in the most academic sense, um, what I really need to do is give him a reason why he was
Uh-huh.
right.
Yeah.
You know, same thing like counting, like, watch like a calendar time. I'm
Uh-huh.
sure you've already done an episode, but kids just counting
Yeah.
days, and we're recording on the 22nd of
Sure.
December, and we'd count 22 days. Oh, today's December 22nd. It's like,
Uh-huh.
how many kids were really like into, yeah, let's keep counting. I can't wait till tomorrow because now we can count to 23
Right.
versus, hey, would you put out the snack?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
oh, you don't know how many, or they put out snack. Like I used to just let kids do it,
Yeah.
and they'd set like 10 plates all in like front of one chair, and kids would like wash their hands and be looking like, I don't have a snack.
Uh-huh.
And I'd say to the kid, oh, Jeremy, Jacob, doesn't have a snack. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, well, it is. Right. And then other kids would be like, well, how many kids are there? Like they'd know they
Yeah.
needed, and other kids didn't. And I didn't need to, because I wasn't like, I need to teach you counting. It was much more
Mhm.
like, I need us to take care of each other and
Yeah.
serve snack. And counting is going to come up at some point.
Right. Right.
Oh, we don't have enough. We're going to need one more pair or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Like it'll
Yeah.
come up at some point. Just
Yeah.
naturally, if you just give kids, you
Yeah.
know,
Or we have 10, but they're all over here on this side of the table.
yes, right. One correspondence
So
if you
there's
want
some
to get
one-to-one correspondence and stuff like that. Yeah.
but it's only important because it matter and whatever. But like, why do those things matter? I mean, that's again where we get into exclusion. The things we've decided matter
Hmm.
seem to come from white middle class culture of you know people who used to play teacher when they were kids and grew up, and now
Yeah.
they want to do it. And it's like how much in the American field of early childhood education, I don't see very much talked about with storytelling.
Right.
I mean, say it's fine and everything, but like when I see about book reading, it's like we've got to read to kids every day.
Right.
We've got to, whatever. And it's like, but what about storytelling?
Right.
Like storytelling is such a rich, um, even if you want to look at it in terms of like different checklists, different.
Yeah. Right. You can make standards. You can make standards fit into your storytelling.
But the idea that, like, I mean, in our, I'm in Minnesota, the licensing standards, they have, how many books you need
Yeah.
by the kids. And then if you go to like NAEYC accreditation, how many of different types of books do you need and all
Right.
that, right? But nowhere do I see a checklist that's just like, have you told a story that gets a little scary? Have
Yeah.
you told a story that the children gave ideas for?
Yeah.
Have you told, like, and which is fine. I don't want another checklist. But
Right.
my point is, when you create a checklist, you always have to choose which things to do, which things
Uh-huh.
not to do. And it just, and then the mentality of that is to just keep adding to a checklist. So
Right.
that's my fear now is someone is going to say, oh, let's add that to the accreditation standards. Or
Yeah.
like, I remember, I won't name names. I remember reading an article in a magazine of an
Yeah.
organization I may have just
Sure.
mentioned.
Sure.
And it was about, when you go around your environment, your classroom or whatever, or your playground, it's nice to just make sure you have certain things in place because things might have got, broken or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And so there's this thing with like 10 items. Again, I won't mention names and I won't mention what type of rating scale they ended up creating and whether there's one on early childhood rating
Sure.
scale, a family childcare rating scale,
Sure.
infant toddler rating scale.
Right.
But suddenly it became this giant booklet with 100 different things. And then states are like, oh yeah, let's use this to decide if your program is
Quality.
of getting grants and quality. And it was like, let's start with 10 things in an ag magazine article like 20 years ago. And as soon as you get into the checklist mentality, it's like the way to be inclusive is just to keep adding to your checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And instead it's like, what if we thought about exclusion and try to avoid it?
Yeah.
Then you don't need a checklist. What you need to do is interact with the people around you and like, oh, this new child came in.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had a child with that doesn't celebrate the family doesn't celebrate birthdays
Mhm.
for religious reasons or whatever, personal reasons, but, oh, I've never had that. How do I include this child? Because we normally have a birthday crown for the kid with the birthday,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
we want to honor that, but we also want to honor this. What do we do? You don't need a checklist to do that. You need to assume that the child and the family are the experts in this
Mhm.
case, but then you also know that there's other families and you're the person who has to deal with the whole group. And you may go to whatever experts in the field who have dealt with this
Mhm.
dilemma if you can't figure it out yourself, or
Right.
hopefully your reflective practice
Right.
partners,
Yeah.
uh,
And
whatever. And so like that's a
it
whole
may,
different thing. So
yeah,
yeah,
it may look different. This family suddenly is new to my program, and they don't do birthdays, and so we figure it out. And then in 6 years you may have a different family come in who's don't celebrate birthdays, and different families who do, and you've got to
yeah, right,
that's the problem with the checklist, is that we think this is always going to be true, and this
right.
is always going to be a solid measurement, when the reality is we're all constantly evolving, and we'll all have new people in our teams,
Yeah.
um,
Actually,
all the
I
time.
want to tell a story about, I do a lot of training around the a gender
Yeah.
and gender identity, gender development. A lot of it based on some guests that you've had before,
Uh-huh.
Nancy Stell and Nathaniel Flynn and all the other people who
Yeah.
wrote that book from the Gender Justice and Early
Yeah.
Childhood Collective.
Julianne Nicholson, is she one of
Yep,
them? Yeah.
yep. But anyways, I was doing this presentation, talking about the most recent research, and we're going through all this stuff. And this one couple, they had a family childcare in um, a suburb. I don't know if we nowadays we'd call it purple, like it's kind of
Mhm.
conservative, kind of not.
Yeah.
But they just said a family came in and they said they wanted us to use they them pronouns for their child until the child told anyone
Okay.
differently. So the child was an infant when she started.
Uh-huh.
And then it wasn't until she was 3.5 that she said, I'm a girl.
Okay.
And so then it was asked, do you want us to use she, her pronoun? Do we want to say she when we talk about you? I guess is
Uh-huh.
probably
Yeah.
said it to a 3-year-old. And it's like, yeah. And so that's what they did. But this couple did not understand. They had none of this more recent ideas around gender, what gender identity is
Mhm.
versus sexual
Right.
uh, um, identity, or
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and they were just like, oh, and so when I was talking about this different research and what terminology people use and all this, like, oh, this makes sense. And then they told that story, and they didn't have to know that information first
Uh-huh.
to act.
Ah.
All they did was listen, try it out,
Uh-huh.
and then say, yeah, this is working. Because that's the one thing. Sometimes a parent will tell you something, and either you kind of like, whatever, you might think, if they told you, oh, yeah, whenever my kid does this, just hit him with this stick.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna you bring in yourself, and parents might have something like that, but
Right.
or they might say, oh, at home we just do this, and so you try it, but in a group environment it doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of times I find like rest time,
Sure.
parents suggest things, and it's like, that's great, except when there's 10 other kids and
Yeah.
your child's looking around, hey,
Yeah.
and they're going to crawl around the room to see all
Yeah.
their friends, and
Right.
at home they're in a crib still, or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so it's not that the family is always right about what works in your program or what you ethically would
Mhm.
do, but in this case, ethically made sense.
Why not?
Try it, and the child reacted positively, so you're on the same team.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so I think that I just like that example, as they didn't have to know
Right.
any of the information. All they had to do was respect the kid
Uh-huh.
and the family.
Yeah, that's a really important perspective. Again, going back to that analysis paralysis that some of us get into
Right.
when we have these new situations come up, or we're not quite sure all the details, or what language all that kind of stuff. Just listening to the parent, family,
Yeah. I mean, it
child.
gets into So then the reverse question is, what if the child was assigned male at birth, but wanted she, her pronouns, and the parents didn't want you to?
Yeah.
That's a different question. I think
Yes.
in that book, gender
Supporting gender diversity in early childhood.
Thank you. They do a really good job of how to have those conversations.
Yes.
And it's probably not where this episode needs to go, but
right. We'll bring them back maybe sometime.
It's basically, if you disagree, you want the conversation around, tell me more. Tell me why you think this, and get to the crux of things, and then talk about your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about the perspective of, I'm working with all these families, and different people will have different ideas. So, you know, whatever, at my center recently, so other children's families, I think I might have used this on the last episode with you, but around nail polish, but you know, like other families are okay with their sons using nail polish. So, you know, if you don't want to for your son, that's fine, just so you know.
Right.
Other people do. So it's that idea that you still have a group environment, you're still the, whatever you want to call it, the gatekeeper of all these experts.
Yeah.
And don't, and the paralysis though is the part that
well, I had similar experiences around holidays in one of my programs. You know, there were some families who didn't celebrate Christmas and felt very strongly and were really like grateful that there wasn't Christmas everywhere in the classroom the year that their children were with me, while there was another family who was very offended because that's you know, and felt like in fact used the words that I was taking Christmas away from her 4-year-old. So there's always some navigation, I guess, is what I'm.
And it was probably too much to send the letter home telling families to get rid of all the Christmas decorations in their house.
Right. I did overstep when I sent that mandate out.
No, that's what I always try to use, that thing of my room is a neutral place where we're welcoming all these different families. And if a kid wants to draw pictures around their holiday or make things, then I'm going to allow that. But I don't want a child to feel like they're excluded because this classroom celebrates Christmas.
Right.
And if you don't, well, you know, you're welcome to be here.
Yeah.
Like, we're inclusive because we're allowing you to be here and, you know, experience this, you know, holiday you don't celebrate. I actually remember that I had a kid. So this goes back to not totally getting it, but so that's what I would do in my classroom. But then there was this one child who hadn't been diagnosed with autism yet, but knowing now, I would have known the diagnosis was coming. But I was pretty new in my career, but he came in and he had made a chart. His family was from Holland. He had made a chart comparing Santa Claus to Sinterklaas.
Nice.
And he had these like 4-year-old drawings. But when he talked, he would go like just this level of detail, right? You know? And so I had him come in and present this to all the other kids and all the other teachers, because our whole place was this, you know, hippie place where we didn't celebrate holidays.
Yeah.
And I heard afterwards, like, everyone had a peek in to see, like, oh, this new teacher is allowing holidays. And then they like watched and it's like, oh, this is being led by the kid.
Yep.
And because even like the amount of detail, it was like, because he would be like, oh yes, and whatever, I don't know, in 1259, blah blah blah, whatever.
I want that presentation.
I know. He'd now be in his late 30s, I think. But I bet he could still do the presentation.
It would still be interesting.
Yeah, he's the same kid where I was trying to figure him out because he'd usually answer things in one-word sentences. And I left a little like recorder next to him. I mean, nowadays I would be my phone, but back then it was like a dictation thing. And you can hear my footsteps leaving. And after I leave, he's suddenly like, the moon is 3,560, and just started rattling off details about planets and moons and stuff. And you hear my footsteps coming back, and then he's just
back to one word. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're using a lot of red paint. Tell me about that. It's these. It's red.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that's such a good tie-in back to multiple experts and the child's expertise and figuring that all out. I mean, we had in the language preschool, we had a little 4-year-old who showed a lot of the indicators of autism, but the official medical diagnosis was that he was not
Yeah,
autistic. And that really threw some of our graduate clinicians who were working with him for a loop, because what do we do now? It's like, well, you
right,
keep looking at what he's telling us he
right.
needs and wants to do. And it
Yeah,
doesn't matter whether there's the label we thought.
right. Just act like,
He's telling us about
yeah,
himself.
I have no diagnosis, but I've been learning on YouTube like different hacks that adults with ADHD do.
Uh-huh.
And I just try them and things work really well.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, things are so much easier now. And
Yeah.
I don't have a diagnosis. I don't need one. And even if I went to get one and they didn't give me one, I still know the hacks work.
Right.
For that child, the autistic child I just talked about, I'm remembering now the one thing he did want to do is he would try to play with kids. And when he would join play, it was unsuccessful.
Yeah.
And I made a visual of when we want to, join others in play. I don't know how I worded it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had 3 pictures with like words next to them and just hung it up. And it's for everybody
Uh-huh.
because all the kids, could use a little reminder. But he
Right.
would literally walk over and point to the picture and recite the words, word for word, what I had said.
Uh-huh.
And then he would start to do those things. So again, I didn't have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
I had been told, because of the experts I, learned from,
Uh-huh.
that when a child's struggling with something, one thing that can work is a visual.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And then it
Mhm.
turned out to actually help this child. And,
Yeah.
and that's, and I remember the family after, when he did get a diagnosis, just coming back to me, he was in kindergarten, and just saying, we just knew he wasn't fitting in,
Uh-huh.
but we never felt that he didn't fit in your room. You always just accept him for who he was, but
Yeah.
everywhere else it was like, why isn't this child
Yeah.
behaving the way my checklist says, essentially? And my favorite thing is that in the play in elementary school, they did Willy Wonka and he played Willy Wonka. And it's like, oh my God.
Amazing.
What
Yeah.
would you do if Willy Wonka was in your classroom? And what things would you be checking off? Or
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So anyways,
Oh.
that might have been a tangent.
That's okay. I don't know if you noticed it. That's kind of what happens. That's kind of what we do.
Oh, now you tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez.
If you speaking of tangents, sorry to yell in everybody's ear. I don't know what I was going to say. Now I've completely derailed everything.
Yeah.
For those of you listening and not watching, I just strangled myself with my headphones. Okay, what else? Anything else?
So I'm going back to the quote for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that because it can be a lot, we just went in 100 different ways with
Right.
it. But I have found that just going back to that phrase, be on the same team as the
Mhm.
child, has been helpful for teachers I work with, in
Yeah.
my workplace, to just like, oh, what do I do in the moment? Well, how do I make sure I'm not? So we have a inclusion specialist who's always do a visual. So those on YouTube can see this.
Yeah.
Do this, do this.
Okay.
Right. So what is it going to be that's going to help the child get to what they're trying to do?
Uh-huh.
Versus what's going to be just a power struggle. And that's
Yeah.
the word most people in this field understand.
Right.
You find yourself in these power struggles, and it's like, is this the hill I want to die on, that the child is sitting in a chair while they're eating?
Yeah.
Or can they stand at the table?
Yeah. Would it really be
right?
so bad?
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we all do it. We all get to this point, especially if we were raised, the more we were raised in a
Authoritarian.
authoritarian mold, the more it's going to have to be, oh, wait.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to say to the child, oh, okay, I see you really want to stand. So I'm just worried that you might choke if you're moving quickly.
Right.
What do you think we could do here? So you're on the same team, you have the same goal.
Yeah.
And then you can go from there, I guess is to say it.
And I have always, for a long time anyway, tended to say, avoid power struggles. Adults very rarely win power struggles, but it's so much, I think, could be so much more effective to think instead of what do I need to do to be on her team? right now,
Yeah,
instead of, do I really want to get into a situation I can't win? It's a totally different mindset, I think. And what you think determines what you do.
Yeah.
So changing even the language we think in can be
Right.
just a good first step.
Yeah. And I'll just do the plug for the book because I'm so
Yeah.
bad at it normally. But
I
then in
know.
the book, that chapter, partly what I do is, so how would you rely on these different experts? Because when you're finding it's hard to be on the same team. Who can help with that? And depending on what the thing is,
Mhm.
with that child who, that ended up getting an autism diagnosis, had I not had the training I did, it would have been probably an occupational therapist would have told me right away,
Yeah.
oh, visuals.
Yeah.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, the book kind of helps talk you through that because
Mhm.
each type of expert is very different and can be conflicting responses. And of course, there's multiple experts, there's multiple
Mhm.
representatives of a culture, there's,
Yeah.
so, and if I've definitely had the experience, I'm sure you all have, of even when there's only two parents and they have very different ideas.
Yes, exactly.
To be
Yes.
more assertive, they need to
Yeah.
stop telling kids what to do.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Well, that's a whole other family
Yeah,
working with
sorry.
families episode. That's okay.
I'm
Yeah.
so bad at plugging my book. Oh, and it's called
Yeah.
Inclusion Includes Us.
Right.
And
Yes.
I have
And it's available everywhere.
and it's blurry when I held it up, but yeah,
Well, yeah.
it's available everywhere.
Let me.
Although I heard it was unavailable at Amazon for a little while, so that
Oh,
was
that's exciting.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably only had like 3 copies, but still.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know I just ordered some more to have on hand for classes at Ye Old Ivy Tech. So
Excellent.
yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Mike. It's always fun to talk to you. And
Yeah,
I really do just love this book. So thank you for the book and the conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Come back again for another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.